Spirit, and our topic today is data horror stories in startups and how to avoid them. With me today is data expert Ali Baghshomali and startup founder Amogh Sarda. Ali is the creator of Product Analytics Academy, an online school that provides high-quality product analytics courses. He's also the founder of Mentat Analytics, a top-rated analytics consulting agency, and he previously worked on the data teams at Bird and BuzzFeed. Amogh is the co-founder of Eesel, a tool that brings your work docs right to your new tab. He's based in Australia and was previously a product manager for both Atlassian and Intercom. Today, Amogh agreed to share some real stories he's faced during his startup journey and discuss them with Ali. And we'll hope you'll find some valuable insights in their discussion, and feel free to ask questions and share your own horror stories in the Q&A section. We'll be happy to discuss them with our guests. So I'll pass the spooky baton to our guests, Ali and Amogh to share his first story. Thank you so much, both of you.
Cool. Well, yeah, thank you for that lovely introduction. And yeah, I love the spooky baton pun. There are going to be a few more puns in this little prezzo I prepared, so you have been warned. I'll just sort of kickstart the first story. So yeah, the first story I've prepared is touching on how we wired events for Eesel, and sort of the complications, I'd say, of dealing with event tracking when you're in an early stage setting in particular. So yeah, spectacular analytics. So I guess to set the scene, Eesel is a browser extension. The idea is that it filters your browser history and only shows your work-related links right in your new tab. So if you need to find something, you can search for it, filter by app, and so on. So cool, like that makes sense. We had a few users using this, and we think, cool, let's build some team feature. We had an interesting idea for a team feature, and the idea was projects, right? So you could group related documents together for a particular project. It makes it easier for teams to collaborate on the project, build this source of truth for the project, onboard someone new to the team, so on. Cool. That makes sense. We obviously need events for something like this. So we built this, and then we wired in some events. Project created, when a project is being created, when a project is being opened, when a page from the project is being accessed. Fairly straightforward, right? There's nothing scary just yet. And okay, it starts to get a bit scary now. We renamed projects to folders like 3 months into the project. That's fine, right? It's not great, but you can just rename the events. Project created becomes folder created, folder open, folder document click through, you get the point. And you can update all the mixed panel dashboards. And we in fact even made a little, we even made custom events. So we made a folder or project created custom event to track both folder created and project events, project created in the one event. And you can imagine we made this pair for like every single thing, just so you can analyze the data historically just easily, make life easier there. Cool. So we're kind of done cleaning up this mess. It wasn't great, but okay, we just discovered something else now. Just when we're done cleaning that up, we realize, oh, actually, we're missing these events over here for more nuanced events, you can say, for a setting being open or a link being copied for the project. And actually, now there's this new sidebar that we have, which is a totally new way of a folder being open. And actually, let's make sure we track folders being open from the sidebar as well. Oh, and by the way, there's also this new thing called folder suggestions, which is this totally new type of folder, you can say. These are folders that we automatically create for you and suggest for you to create or not. So obviously we need to be tracking them being open as well. And cool, you're sort of starting to get the gist of it. What's happening is that we're just iterating really fast in this setting. We start with something fairly straightforward. But this is totally new for us, and we're going to be building on top of that, and it's going to be happening relatively fast. And we're sort of stuck in this red pill, blue pill situation where we're either just straight up missing on the data, or we're just losing tons and tons of energy trying to keep everything up to date. And of course, like both of these options don't feel great. in an early stage setting, specifically, like, where we're kind of grappling around in the dark, we really need signals. It's really painful if we miss out on data, especially when a new feature is launched and people first start using it. Like, it's really critical to have that data. And then obviously we also are a very small team. We cannot possibly afford to be losing tons and tons of time just trying to do this work about work to actually wire in the events. And yeah, that's sort of where we were stuck between these two worlds until we sort of discovered this beautiful React hook. And in other words, it's the universal click. And the idea really is to have this analytics listener at a really high level at the React hierarchy, and it's just listening to clicks. So it's listening to all clicks on buttons, links, selects, and passing on metadata associated with whatever the thing that was clicked. So you can see some metadata, like, was the user logged in, was it in the new tab, or was it in Spotlight, which is another way you can use Eesel. And then the label of the thing that was clicked. And the magical thing about this is that it just works, right? There's no need for us to come up with all these different names for the events. There's no need to actually wire anything. There's no explicit need to even QA the events, and it just sort of works. It's also platform agnostic. So, over here, we're using Mixpanel for this, but, it just works with anything. If we wanted to tomorrow start using some other tool like Amplitude, it would work with that. We can obviously pass it on to Segment and so on. So yeah, the magical thing there is that it's just fully out of the box. And so, yeah, the next time you're sort of feeling stuck between these two worlds with red pill, blue pill, I would consider this React hook. And we're on that, like, we're happy to open source this as well, this part of how we did it, if that's interesting for folks. Cool. That was the first story. I guess, Ali, this is your time to give feedback on that, I suppose.
All right. Thank you very much for that great story, Amogh. Yeah, you touched on something that a lot of teams struggle with, which is the work required to track all these event data that they need to analyze over at Mixpanel or Amplitude, anywhere like that. And also just making sure that you have everything captured ahead of time, because a lot of times you end up asking the question later and it takes some time to get everything implemented. I'm curious, with auto tracking. So auto tracking is this sort of solution that's been presented recently in the past couple of years as a way to deal with this exact problem that you had, which pretty much every company has. And it's had sort of like varying levels of success. It hits some baseline, but it sort of doesn't hit all the needs. And there's some companies that really like market their service around it. Heap, for example, comes with an auto track tool with it. Heap is an alternative to Amplitude and Mixpanel. And so do some CDP products like FreshPaint. So in this case, Amogh, you're generating the name of the item that's been clicked on sort of automatically, right? I saw that there was like a label and an item ID, stuff like that. What happens in situations where sort of an object changes within the product and its label changes as well? Does the property label for that same object change?
Yeah. So we introduced. So the out of the box, it's just going to be the label of the button, the ARIA label. And we also introduced a way to actually pass on another label. So if you wanted to, you could, for the component, specifically call out data analytics label and pass on another label that isn't just the text of the button, but just something more explicit. Yeah, so we did that for a few things, but honestly, at our stage, like I'd say we're adding new things more often than we're usually changing the copy of buttons. I think, I mean, this is a sort of a broad statement to make, but I guess I'm just saying that we're really sort of reflecting on iterating on the micro copy at our stage, and it's almost just like we're just shipping. We're making bigger changes, and so yeah, totally, I can see how if we change the copy of another feature, then we're sort of back into that world where, okay, now we have these two events. But on the bright side, we'd still not be really missing any event. So even if we ended up in that situation, we could still, at least we're not missing any data in this case.
Yeah. So you touched on something important there, and I totally agree with you. So I think the way to think about auto tracking is to think of it as sort of creating this trade-off. And for every team who wants to decide whether they want to do it yourself, it's a matter of deciding whether the trade-off is worth it for you or not. So in your case, Amogh and Eesel's case, it was worth it. So the team did it. But I'd like to lay out just kind of what exactly that trade-off is for everybody here who might be considering that. So the pro versus the con, the pros of doing auto tracking is exactly the stuff that Amogh said. Like, you capture a lot of data. You don't end up having to sort of like keep going back and adding more things in. It cuts down on some of your development time, and you get a baseline of data coming in. The downside is that the data ends up being sort of a lot messier than if you were to be picky with the things that you're tracking, because you're tracking every click, a lot of ones that might not be useful. And so you have like a very large amount of event data flowing into your product based on whether or not your product is charging based on event count versus user count. That can make a difference in your pricing. Mixpanel tends to be user count based, so you don't have to worry about that, but a lot of the tools are event count based, so you have to deal with that. The other issue is with so this is sort of like one of the biggest issues with auto tracking, which is that if you make changes to the structure of your product, then because the names of the events are being automatically added, the names will end up changing. So if you take the same object and you put it somewhere else, or you change the name or do something like that, suddenly, even though we know of it as the same object and we want the event that's triggering for it to be the same, the data actually changes. So what you've done now is sort of you have to, some work that previously you had to do on the implementation side now gets passed to the data governance side, where you have to go in, for example, if you're familiar with Mixpanel, there's a lexicon tool. You have to go in and rename all of your events and like say, okay, if the labeled property is called A or B or C, then merge them all together and do a lot of this work over there. So that's sort of one trade-off, where you're essentially forcing yourself to do the cleanup work because now you're capturing everything. The other downside to it is that you miss out on a lot of event property information that is specific to the items that you're tracking. So I'm going to give a very basic event tracking lesson here for anybody who might be new to this right now. So, event data refers to specific actions or occurrences in the app. So let's think of a common product, like, let's just think of like buying something off of Amazon. If you think of the core actions there, like you search for a product, you view an item's details, you add it to cart, and you purchase it. Each of those occurrences can have their own event trigger, which is a data point that says someone searched, someone added an item to cart, and someone made a purchase. And events are these data points that are timestamped, so you can know which happened when relative to each other. And then events have contextual information alongside them, and that contextual information is called like properties. So it's not enough just to know that someone has searched for something. You also want to know what was the thing that they searched for. So the event would be item searched for, the property would be, say, search term, search category, things like that. The event would be item purchased, and properties would be price of the item, a count of like how many of the item was bought and things like that. When you do auto tracking in this type of thing, you no longer have these custom properties set up, because all you're tracking is a click for the search and a click for the purchase. So you no longer have the additional information that says, here's how much the purchase cost, here's the category of it, here's what the search term was, because they all have different properties. So you sort of like run into an issue there. So the recommendation that comes even with tools that do have auto tracking is always to do at minimum a hybrid implementation, which is put some auto tracking in place to capture a set of things. That way you don't have complete gaps in your data, but then make sure that you also go through and you do manual event tracking, which is sort of the thing that the team was struggling at first, because otherwise you're also going to miss out on a lot of information. For me and my clients, I usually recommend just all manual, but it definitely makes sense in some cases when you don't have the resources to do a hybrid implementation like the Eesel team did. And overall, like sort of what I recommend around trying to tackle the issues that your team ran into is to treat the analytics portion of it as part of the product development cycle. So you should think of your internal analytics product just like any other product. You have to think of it as having certain requirements that you have to think of ahead of time before you build the thing. Just, if you couldn't build your product Eesel without having something in mind that you want the users of that product to do, right? It's like you always need to know what the product is used for before you build it out. And the same thing goes for your data products, which are all the dashboards and stuff that you build internally for your team. You need to know what users within your company are going to be using it for before you can actually build it out. This is why a lot of companies have positions like director of data products and things like that, even for internal tools, because they want to take like a product management approach to it. So with that in mind, what I always recommend is that whenever you're building a new feature, should have a list of questions that you want to answer about that feature, or a list of metrics about it that you want to track ahead of time. So if anybody here is sort of more on the product side, if you're making a product requirements document, you want to have a section in it always dedicated to analytics. So if you launch a new feature, you go, okay, here's the 3-4 questions that I want to answer about it. And you think through the process for those 3-4 questions, and you come up with a set of events and properties that are able to then answer those questions. And that way, anytime something new is shipped, the event tracking information is shipped alongside it. And so you have up-to-date data for every change that your product goes through. I covered this sort of in the how to write a tracking plan portion of the courses that Cynthia mentioned on Product Analytics Academy. So if you end up going there, and if you're interested in product analytics, it gets covered there. But that's the main thing that I recommend to everybody. Like, always make sure that the analytics and event tracking portion is part of the product development cycle. That way it stays up to date.
Yeah, that is super insightful. I think a lot of it really resonates as well. So I guess the context in our situation is that we incorporated the analytics into our product development cycle by we usually write a tech plan for any meaningful piece of work, and we, as part of the tech plan template, explicitly added an analytics section, right? because we were bad at this, like because there wasn't any forcing function for us to actually wire it in. Like, obviously in theory we would look at the success metrics, like it was in the problem definition, and obviously in theory we had hypotheses on what we would be measuring, but there's like the core of the things that you want to be tracking for the success, but then there's all these other things, right? Like the settings page being open, like obviously we need an event for that, but it's not like it's top of mind right now. Right. And I think that's exactly where I feel like the hybrid model you're saying fits in really well, where I feel like for the core things you still should probably add in manually like the event properties and all that, and then for like all these other smaller interactions that are really easy to miss out on and probably on top of mind today, but then they might be interesting like 3 months from now, that's probably where this the universal click can come in.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I like the approach you have with it being sort of a click and then the details are in the properties, because that way it creates sort of like less of a mess in your product, because it's like everything that's auto-tracked is coming through this one event.
Exactly.
And worst case scenario, you can always just go and hide that specific event out of your data. And it's like, okay, well, all the sort of like messy stuff is hidden now. And yeah, so that's why I think that the hybrid implementation sort of ends up hitting all the points. I really like your approach, and I think that's you said you might just like open source the code. I think that's a great idea. Allow other people to use that. Seems pretty straightforward to set up. I think so. This is React, so it works for like web stuff, right? Web and mobile web. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I think that's where most of the products are. So I think that'll be very useful for people.
Yeah. And just the last that I had bouncing on this was, even if the universal thing may not fit for someone, I think just generally approaching it with the premise of having more global events and packing more into the event properties felt like an easier model to play with, rather than having, like basically rather than having 20, 30 different event names, having more global events and actually packing the information in the event properties. I think maybe this is just specifically to the tooling that we had, but I just found it easier to navigate that in Mixpanel and just deal with the lexicon like that.
Yeah. I think the sort of like there's always like a balance you want to hit over how much information you want to put in the title versus the properties. What I recommend is usually just like one object and one action in the event title, and the rest go in the properties. So it's like, search completed, item purchase, something like that, and the rest goes in. But I think Cynthia is ready to move us on to the next topic. So I'll stop going into detail here.
This is fantastic. This is a great conversation. But Amogh, I know you have another story. I'd love to hear your other story as well.
Cool. So yeah, the other story is more broadly around how we kind of got started or startled with our data info. I warned you about the puns, so it's kind of just a fun story of what our first data stack looked like, and it really was just Intercom and Google Sheets. So the fun fact is that Eesel works fully locally. So basically, we didn't have any database or server on our side. It was just we had a few thousand users without any server at all, and we were just using Intercom and Google Sheets. We're all ex-Intercom, so there's a big bias there to push Intercom to an extreme, and we definitely did that. So all our event analytics were coming in from Intercom, and in particular, we were actually using the out-of-the-box user attributes that Intercom gives. So to kind of give you a sense, like for any particular user, we were getting things like their first seen, signed up date, when they were created as a user, and so on. But then obviously we were also and their browser, operating system, things like that. And then also there were some custom attributes that we could send by Intercom, like in our case we were curious on their app version, the amount of space that Eesel was using locally, because we were worried at the time that Eesel might eat up all your local storage. Turned out to not be a valid concern, but so the idea was really just using these attributes. And unfortunately, at the time, Intercom didn't really have too many reports to actually visualize this data inside Intercom itself. I know since then they've done a lot more work on the reports. And also there wasn't any way to visualize a trend over time, right? So obviously in this is all like a static attribute, but if I wanted to study this over time, I couldn't do that inside Intercom. And so that's where we started just manually exporting things onto Google Sheets, and kind of just went ham on Google Sheets. So I was just manually exporting the data, like snapshots of the users, and just creating visualizations off of that. So yeah, there was a full-blown data picker there. There was little suggestions on analyzing the data. You could obviously look at retention, cohort retention, just based on signed up date and last seen, when the user was last seen and when they were signed up. You could look at other properties, like visualize any of the other user properties. In this case, I was visualizing the distribution of number of documents that people were accessing, and distribution of the document counts that they had in their Eesel. And a bunch of other things like that. And just to kind of give you a sense of how much conviction I had on this Intercom-based analytics, I actually built an Intercom app called Analytics for Intercom, where the idea was really just, it was similar. Basically, you plug it in and it would take snapshots of your Intercom data and just give you these charts out of the box. Because I really felt at the time, and I still do believe this, there's just tons and tons of data just inside Intercom itself, that especially as an early stage startup, that might just be enough for you to get all the insights you need. And of course, with time, we did level up, and we've got Metabase now, Mixpanel, segment, and so on. But there's something to be said about just being super lean, especially in the early days, and keeping things simple.
That's awesome. Did you, so that analytics for Intercom thing, did it take off? Was that like a product spinoff from Eesel? Like you were making it for yourself and then it became a separate product?
Yeah, honestly, it's just a side project, so I don't give it much love these days because Easel's taken up all the attention. But yeah, it's still live. Like we still get people coming in. I built this with a mate. We still making a few hundreds of dollars a month. It's not like crazy big, but
Right.
yeah, I think there's potential there. So if someone wants to pick this up and give it the love it deserves, then yeah, I'm ears.
That's really cool. That's really cool. I loved it. Yeah, it looked like it made it look a lot, sort of a lot cleaner. It seems like it addresses things for a lot of folks in your position. Yeah, the starting out with Google Sheets, I think is sort of like very common. And I gotta say, I love me some Google Sheets, man. I really think it's like it's a super powerful tool. I think it's one of those things that it's because it's so powerful and and also like free and widespread. We kind of like forget how great it is. But it's a very good tool. I always, if I have just a little bit of data, if it's a one-time thing, I sometimes do my analysis there, even if I have the option of doing it somewhere else. So yeah, I think in this case, like part of the struggle would probably be that you would have to keep exporting things, right? It's like not syncing between Intercom and Sheets, so you just have to keep exporting it, throwing it in there, cleaning it up, and doing everything by hand every time you wanted to make an update. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I totally forgot a few snapshots, and yeah, it's definitely way too cumbersome.
Yeah. And so like about how many users did you have at this stage when you were doing this stuff? So like where did you hit your capacity of where you're like, all right, maybe we're gonna have to go to a different tool?
Yeah, I'd say we were doing this till 2000, 1000, 2000 users. So I don't even know if it's yeah, like to an extent, we should have maybe leveled up even earlier. I think what happened was that I remember we did look into using some of the tools at the time, like Amplitude and Mixpanel. And I just remember Mixpanel, the pricing was not affordable at the time. I think they've since changed it and it became affordable, and then that's sort of when we jumped ship. So I think pricing was a blocker, and to an extent, yeah, we were just there was also not enough reason to at that point. Like it just felt like we were able to get the insights we need, and a lot of the insights were actually qualitative at the time as well. We were just like talking to tons and tons of people. So around 2000 users.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, they have addressed the pricing thing. I think they have a free tier that's like pretty basic that's available, but it probably, is sort of like on the same level as some of the stuff you get from Intercom. But they also have this is a good thing for people to keep in mind if you're sort of like look into any of those tools. They have a startup plan, sort of, that where if your company has less than a certain amount of funding and is started, if it's like within its first year or something, first year, 2 years of operations, then you get their growth package, which is really powerful. You get it for free for like a year or two. I think you get like $50,000 in credit. So you just have to search like startup program for each of these tools and see what they offer. So that's just a tip for people to keep in mind, because it's not super well advertised. It's there, but it's not super visible. But it can definitely save you some money to do something like that. In general, I would say that like I love the two stories that you picked on, because I feel like they touch on two very common issues that companies come across. The first one around being able to allocate the resources that analytics need, because sort of you find that ultimately like anything that's not a barrier to shipping a product tends to end up getting deprioritized, and analytics is not a barrier to shipping, it's a barrier to like insights. And so what happens in a lot of companies, it ends up getting deprioritized, the information you want to capture for it. And then you have to pay for it later because you're like, wait, I have questions and I can't answer them. So you talked about sort of that issue around giving resources to analytics for early stage startups in your first story. And the second one is always this question of like, which tool should we be using, and like when is the time for each? Should they be used together? That kind of thing. And that's probably the most common set of questions that I get when I work with clients. Like there's always this question of like, hey, should I, like, we already have like Metabase. Should we get Mixpanel? We already have like this. Should we get that? And there's this always sort of like a lot of confusion around there. And I think it's made worse by sort of like some of the category names of analytics tools being very, I think, intentionally non-descriptive. Like customer data platform for for something like segments, where it's like, it kind of makes sense, but you're also like, yeah, I don't totally understand what that does. And so I think that's made worse by that. So I recommend people do some research there. And I actually have sort of a few slides that I put together to talk exactly about just a very simple framework around when to sort of like implement which set of tools if people are interested. But Cynthia, I want to be mindful of time. I don't know when you want me to bring that up. It'll probably take like a few minutes. But then yeah,
you're doing great. Whenever you're ready, you feel free to show that.
All right, cool. And by the way, just so I'm good on time wise, after sort of this stuff is done, are we opening up the floor to Q&A, or are we sort of like continuing to tell stories till the end?
Yeah, feel free to continue to tell stories. So
okay, great. I don't know how many I have left after this one, but we'll try to come up with some more.
We'll see how we do.
All right, awesome. Give me 1 sec to set this up and share my screen. All right. Are y'all able to view my screen?
Yeah.
They're not very creative with naming things. I just extremely descriptive. I'm like, when to set up each analytics tool is just like where I went with it. And nothing further than that.
I'll be doing a talk on analytics puns afterwards. But
yeah, great. I'm glad you have some ready. So the idea here was to try to give you sort of like a very basic sense of when to put things out. Now, of course, keep in mind, I preface something like this by saying that, like, there's no such thing as sort of like a one size fits all strategy for analytics. It's not like this applies exactly to every company. This is to just give you like a rough sense to work off of, because people always have this question of like, oh, is it too early for me to be investing in this tool? Is it too late? Or that kind of thing. This is giving you a rough sense of the progression of things, that sort of like the most common use cases. So to get started, let's think about sort of like the pre-launch or like closed alpha stage of your product. This is when you have, I would say, like roughly, 10, 20, like that many users. You're kind of very, very early stage. At this point, having a tool like a Mixpanel or Metabase is sort of like too early for it. You don't really get that much usage out of it. Because you have few users, you want to optimize for getting as deep as possible with those few users. And really the best way to go about that a lot of times is just go with like surveys and like rule sheets and just like having conversations with them. So I'll give the example like of when I launched my like online data school. I did the same thing. Like the first stage was just like interviews with people. I literally had like 10 different people that I interviewed about it. And I sent them like surveys to afterwards. And that's, when you're at that stage, when you don't really even have a product, just have like an early stage of it, that's what you want to do. I did the same thing when I did like a live version of my courses to test them out. Like afterwards, I just sent people surveys, and that was sort of like the closed alpha. It's like when you have roughly like, 10 to 50, something like that, users, you can just reach out to them. Like you should just interview them instead of trying to put in an analytics tool, because that gives you the most information. But obviously at a certain point, like you no longer can just like hit up everybody and talk to them. So that's when you want to get into an analytics tool. It's going to aggregate all that information. But this is where you can start out with. And the nice thing about it is that it doesn't require any technical implementation. And then you get to sort of like a launch or like a closed beta, like an open beta. That's when you have like 100 plus users. This page, if you don't have sort of like a SQL expert yet, is sort of typically the case. You might have someone who knows a little bit of SQL, but you don't have really anybody in-house. That's where you want to do like product insights as sort of your priority. You want to know if there's something really broken, if you want to know if there's like a drop off in your main funnels, something like that. So this is where you want to put in a tool like sort of like a Mixpanel or an Amplitude, that kind of product analytics tool specifically. It's, you have to make sure, by the way, that you do the implementation of it before launch, so that after launch you have that data. You want to put in the event tracking snippets and that type of thing before you actually launch. So don't wait until after you've launched to start setting this up. Do it as part of the product development cycle, as we talked about before. But this is good because, if you're building the product, you have engineers in-house. That means you can implement something like this. And even if you don't have a data analyst or has SQL, these are sort of self-serve products, and you can still get full benefit out of them if you don't have that kind of expertise in-house. But they're sort of limited in what they bring, just like anything else. It works well for one portion of your product, for product insights, but it doesn't necessarily work for business intelligence, which is what a tool like Metabase is for. So that's why we get to like the third stage of it, which is the modern data stack. And that's where things like Metabase come in. So this is sort of, I put it as roughly like 1,000+ users. And practice, usually people grow a little bit further than this before they start implementing something like this. But at that point, I would say you're good to start putting it in. The one thing that you want to sort of make sure you have before you put in the resource to have this is like somebody that has SQL expertise in-house. Now tools like Metabase, they actually have like non-SQL ways of retrieving data as well, which is great. And it really adds a lot for teams that don't have that type of expertise. But ultimately sort of SQL is the way that you get the most amount of value out of it. So recommendation for me is like, wait until you have at least one person who's like, yeah, I'm willing to own the SQL portion of this and clean it up before you put in the resources for at least the rest of these. Like Metabase itself is pretty simple and easy to set up, but if you're going to go with the warehouse, the ETL tool like dbt, which is a data transformation tool, like all these things together, wait until you have somebody that's willing to really own it and do all of that. So this is what you would want to go to, what's called the modern data stack when you're at this level. So you have like 1,000+ users, you have SQL expertise available, all of your teams want analytics, and you have the need for a data system that's very adaptable. So if you have marketing data, you're able to address it. Business and just pure business data, you're able to address it. Products, all of that stuff. And the modern data stack is sort of made up of 4 components. You have your data warehouse, which is where all of the analytics data is stored. You have your ETL tool, which is what puts things into that warehouse. That's like Hevo here, for example. It takes everything from your database, from your product database, puts it in the warehouse. From your third-party tools, everything, just throws them all in there. You have a tool like dbt, which is what allows you to schedule like cleanup jobs and things like that. And then last, you have Metabase, which is the layer that goes on top, which allows you to actually visualize, build reports, and have live information, so you don't have to update things all the time as every change is made. And so that's sort of like, this is the summary of the timeline. If you're gonna sort of like take a screenshot of something, this is where I would say to take a screenshot. This gives you a rough sense of where we want to go. And I know I say users here, but you can think about this as like monthly active users. So when you're very early stage, sort of below 100, just go with, you can go with something like sending surveys or just having interviews. Then when you're at about like 100 stuff, you have engineers, but no SQL folks. You can go with a tool like Mixpanel, where engineering is needed, but not SQL expertise. And then when you're about 1,000, you're like, really make sure you invest in setting up a modern data stack and getting things like Redshift, Metabase, all sorts of tools in that category in place. That this progression gives you a rough sense. And like I said, it's not one size fits all. It differs from person to person. A common question you might get is, what if each of our accounts are like enterprise accounts? Then like 10 enterprise accounts is a lot. What should we do there? It's like, well, if each enterprise account has 20 users, then that puts them at 100+ to go with that. But this gives you a rough sense of the progression. And remember, none of these are meant to necessarily fully replace one another. They just get added as a complement. Like even at this stage, you still want to have the ability to survey some portion of your users or do live interviews. You still want to have Mixpanel is just sort of like here at this stage, you kind of have all of them. So the idea isn't to rip out the previous ones when you get there, is to add them and adapt to that final stage. And Amogh, does this somewhat line up in terms of like what you would expect for your company around or where you want to go with analytics strategy?
Yeah, I think so. I think that really that really resonates. Yeah, I guess we're on like so it's a browser extension, and so I think that, and it's like really easy to install. You don't even need to sign in, and you can keep using Eesel. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is that we're in the opposite spectrum of the enterprise scale. We're in this high volume individual users, lots of individual user scale, and that's probably where my numbers were a bit higher before we actually ended up shifting. But yeah, I think broadly this really resonates, and yeah, and to an extent, like I can totally see how we would have been better off if we were actually more proactive in actually making the move. It's almost like if you're feeling the pain, once you actually actively feeling the pain, it's already too late in some sense.
Yeah. Perfect. Like yeah, you nailed it.
Yeah. When we we were, when we set up Metabase, it was insane. It was like this whole, we very much due something like that in our stack.
Yeah, I think you really nailed the whole like, if there's going to be one big takeaway that our attendees get from this, it's that when you're really feeling the pain, it's too late. Just be proactive about it. Like think about it like, if you have a product roadmap or like a business roadmap, like that means you should have a data roadmap alongside it. Like literally just set them side by side, like make a very simple chart like the one I have on screen that lays out sort of like a few months ahead what every major business or product launch is coming, and then just set up have the business one, have the product one, and just set up a third one that's like your analytics one, and just think through like, hey, if I'm launching an app at this point, then I need like event tracking for that app. If I have headcount now to make an analyst hire at point X, then I need to make sure that an analyst has access to a BI tool so that they can actually run their SQL in it. Like just set a general one. It doesn't need to be super detailed. Just set a general one up for each big milestone of the product and business, and it'll save that simple exercise that might take an hour will save you a lot of work and hassle down the line. So I'll stop sharing this for now, but I hope that addresses a set of problems for some folks. Cynthia, I'll pass it on back to you for next steps.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate both of your stories and your time today. I learned so much. I love the idea of a data roadmap. That's just a fantastic suggestion. So I appreciate both of you sharing today. We will post a copy of this recording to our blog. So if you want to share with your friends, or if somebody that you wish they would have seen this, you'll be able to share that with them. And again, just thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Learned a ton, and I know our listeners did as well. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Have a great day.